Today we're going to talk about the outline to take peace from the earth. Albert Pike, head of worldwide ancient and accepted Scottish rite of Freemasonry, wrote a remarkable letter dated August 15, 1871, which until recently was on display in the British Museum Library in London. In that letter, he told Giuseppe Mazzini, head of all worldwide revolutionary activities, the details of the Luciferian plan for world conquest. He outlined many revolutionary wars to be fomented from a nation that they had to control completely. Then he outlined 3 world wars, with the third pitting the atheist against the Western world of Christianity. Have we seen that exact lineup for the last 85 years? Long before this letter was proposed as a plan to capture the world by the end of the 20th century or shortly thereafter, Francis Wright came from England to New York City and laid bare the program to bring all revolutionaries, atheists, and nihilists under one umbrella called Communism. The Illuminati became very displeased with the Tsar of Russia when he sent a fleet to the south during the Civil War to help break the blockade against the South's ships laden with cotton to be sold in England to raise funds for the war. The Illuminati never forgave the Tsar and decided Russia would be the target for overthrow and established their base of operations to overthrow all governments and religions of the world, upon the ruins of which would be built the New World Order.
In 1896, these 2 Rothschild firms, J.P. Morgan and Kuhn Loeb, owned 96% of all the railroad mileage in the United States.
Wow, talk about a monopoly there.
And that's in congressional reports. I got that right out of, most of my work, by the way, comes from congressional reports.
So you do researching on congressional reports, and how far do you back to this research information go, Eustace?
About 5,000 years.
5,000 years. We're talking to Eustace Mullins, ladies and gentlemen, and we're talking about the New World Order. Well, tell us then, the Rothschilds, tell us about the Federal Reserve. Now they've become involved in the Federal Reserve, and what about Soviet Russia? How did Soviet Russia come into this New World Order situation, Mr. Mullins?
Well, Soviet Russia was always part of the world order, and in fact the Soviet Empire, the evil empire, which we heard so much about, and in the 1950s we were digging atom bomb shelters in our backyards to protect us from this catastrophe which was going to happen at any moment, and which was good for the contracting industry, but it didn't really help anybody as far as avoiding atomic bombs. So the Soviet Empire came about because of greed and envy. Now, communism, of course, is based on hatred, greed, and envy. But what people don't realize is that the Russian Revolution came about because of the greed and envy of King George V of England for his cousin, Tsar Nicholas II of Russia, who happened to be the richest man in the world. And when you're the richest man in the world, the consequence is all the people who are not quite as rich hate you and wish they could get their hands on your money. So the Rothschilds told King George V, they were all around him as his advisors in London, they said, look, let's go after Nick and get his dough. And George said, well, I'm game. And so the Rothschilds started the communist movement in Russia. And so they murdered the Tsar and his family and took his gold, which was sent to Paris and to Kuhn Loeb Company in New York and the other Rothschild offices, London and so forth. And so, as I say, they murdered the richest man in the world, took all of his money.
Well, what year was that, by the way? What year was that when they murdered the Tsar?
Well, that was 1918. They had the communist revolution in 1917. And the first thing they did was go in and loot the whole country. They took all the money. And so the result was the new Soviet empire had no operating capital, and they couldn't tax anybody because they had murdered all the people who owned anything. So you couldn't go out and tax the peasants to keep the country running. So they sent up cries of anguish, and people all over the world responded. Woodrow Wilson, our president, he made a speech to Congress in which he said, it is our duty to help these noble murderers in Moscow, in so many words. And so he first sent them $25 million of his personal war fund, voted to him by Congress to prosecute World War I. And he sent Elihu Root who, by the way, wrote the charters of all the major foundations, Elihu Root was a lawyer of whom J.P. Morgan said, when I call in lawyers and I want something done, they give me a lot of reasons why it cannot be done. He said, when I call in Elihu Root says, what do you want me to do? And I tell him, and he does it. So that's why he became the lawyer for the big bankers in this country.
Now, tell me, Eustace, because there's a lot of people that have said that the banking themselves, that the communist revolution was started on Wall Street. Is that a true fact or not, Eustace Mullins?
It's absolutely true. All of the money for Wall Street, for the Bolshevik Revolution, came from Wall Street, really from Rothschild firms, but it would have been too obvious if the Rothschilds of London were sending all their money over to Russia to help the communists. So they did it through their favorite patsy, which is the American government. And they even formed a special firm on Wall Street in 1916 to finance the communist revolution in Russia, which was called American International Corporation. And its directors were Percy Rockefeller, the richest men in the United States, including a financier named George Herbert Walker, who just happened to be the grandfather of George Bush, our president.
Now, how does this George Bush fit in now? George Herbert Walker Bush, the former president, or about to be president of the United States, formerly anyway, how does he fit in with his father, and was it his father and the Rockefellers and the Harrimans and the Brown brothers? Did they all work together as far as this New World Order is concerned?
Well, the New World Order is a group of insiders. It's sort of an international mafia, and they either work together or they get eliminated. I mean, these people have to cooperate because the death sentence is automatic if you don't. And you don't say, I'm going my way, to heck with you, because if you go your way is straight down. And so George Bush was like a lot of scions of these World Order families. That is, he was unemployable. I mean, if he came in to be interviewed and there were 8 people there, he would be the 8th one that you would hire if you had to hire 8 people. And you set up a regime that you control. Like in 1917, they set up the Bolshevik regime, and the American taxpayer supported the Soviet empire from 1917 right up till the time it collapsed. And the only reason it collapsed was that the United States was bankrupt and they couldn't send them any more money. So we destroyed communism by going bankrupt ourselves, which I guess is one way of doing it.
You said one time, Eustace, that the Russians have been trying to make it through the winter every winter since the inception of the communism, and we've been helping them through the winter. Well, one of the things that was so sad for me to read about, of course, was when the Bolsheviks did go into the Ukraine, and they did kill so many people. They starved between 6 and 8 million Ukrainians out. And this is the end result of what the America has done, because America itself, this government, not the country, I don't believe the country, Eustace, I don't believe the patriotic people in the country, but this government was responsible for funding situations like this, weren't they?
Oh, very much so. And in fact, this great massacre of the Russian peasants in the early 1930s was deliberately suppressed by Walter Duranty, the chief correspondent in Russia of the New York Times, and he dictated what would be allowed to be sent back to this country. They totally suppressed this so that Franklin D. Roosevelt, as a principal plank of his platform in 1933, that was to give official diplomatic recognition to Soviet Russia so we could send them even more money, of taxpayers' money, than they'd been doing before. So, but they couldn't do this if the press was going to print a story that 10 to 12 million Russians had been murdered by Stalin. So the story was completely suppressed, and in fact the American people today really don't know whether to believe it or not. There have been several books out about it by Robert Conquest, which are very good, totally documented, but they don't get much play in the media.
It was Harvest of Despair.
Oh, yes.
It was a television, I think it was about an hour and a half long, or a couple hours anyway, but it showed exactly what happened and the terrible human tragedy that this government, the United States of America government, was involved in by the fact that they supported communism in other parts of the world, namely the Soviet Union at that time. You know, it's interesting to me, Eustace, that over 70 million people have been killed by communism, many by their own people, and we still support governments like that. How can this happen, Eustace Mullins? We have a number of people, different types of people, different nationalities in this world. We had World War I, we had World War II, we had South Korean War, and then we had Vietnam. Should we have fought any of those wars, Eustace Mullins? Was there a real reason? And what was the end result of us being involved in, say, World War I and World War II?
Well, John, you have to understand what wars are. Wars are carefully staged productions. Now, these are all carefully staged, and they did what they were supposed to do, and they had a good audience, and so I think they were successful. But to say that these wars were about anything, that they had some particular philosophy of government opposing another philosophy of government is total nonsense. These were world order productions, and as I say, they were carefully staged. Both sides were set up to perform in a certain manner, and the outcome was always predetermined. In other words, you were looking at a staged production which you had already seen.
And I know when I went in the service, I was just about as patriotic as anybody could possibly be. That's the way that I felt anyway. And, you know, I saw things in the service, Eustace Mullins, that would lead me to believe that I still love my country, don't get me wrong, but it's this government that I don't think that I'd ever fight for again, because you just kill a lot of people, raise a lot of debt, raise a lot of taxes. I come back, the people are far worse off than they ever were before, and we seem to be enslaving ourselves. Is this true, or am I imagining things?
Oh, you're not imagining anything. In fact,
we're talking with Eustace Mullins today, ladies and gentlemen, and this is the book. It's The World Order and it's about our secret rulers. It's extremely, extremely important that we understand what is happening in America today, because we do have a $4 trillion debt. The nation is on its way down. We've become a third world entity. And we used to be the finest, the strongest, the most industrialized, the #1 nation in the world. And our education system also used to be the very best. We're having severe problems, ladies and gentlemen, and that's why Bobby Lee is here today with Eustace Mullins, one of the patriots and the heroes of the truth and the Jeffersonian philosophy of government. So this is the book that I think that you must have in your possession in order to become educated about the world.
Finally, the Illuminati's time came during the First World War. With the Russian military busy fighting the war, V.I. Lenin and his gang of thugs could create unrest and discontent to make Russia ripe for revolution. It happened in 1917 through 1919. V.I. Lenin laid a secondary plan to Pike's overall plan. First, we will take Eastern Europe, then the masses of Asia. Then we will encircle the United States, which will be the last bastion of capitalism. We shall not have to attack. It will fall like a ripe fruit into our hands. While Russia was being built into a weapon of destruction by the Illuminati to foment wars and revolutions, its leaders were also laying the groundwork for an alternative plan to Pike and Lenin's plan. In case the plan of the U.S. falling without a war did not come to pass, an alternative plan was laid down in the 1930s. Dmitry Manilewski at the Lenin School of Political Warfare in Moscow declared, "War to the hilt between communism and capitalism is inevitable. Today," which was 1930, "of course, we are not strong enough to attack. Our time will come in 30 to 40 years. It's been much longer than that. Hey, you never can tell with these things. To win, we shall need the element of surprise. The Western world will have to be put to sleep. So we shall begin by launching the most spectacular peace movement on record. There shall be electrifying overtures and unheard of concessions. The capitalist countries, stupid and decadent, will rejoice to cooperate to their own destruction. They will leap at another chance to be friends. As soon as their military guard is down, we shall smash them with our clenched fists." Well, folks, if you look around America today, it's gotten pretty decadent, pretty outrageous, where we're calling evil good and good evil. So it looks like they had a pretty good plan to go about taking control of the United States government. There's a great documentary out right now by Trevor Loudon called Enemies Within, and it's something you really need to see when you understand the associations that so many of our representatives, I use that term loosely, but so many of our representatives that are part of communist and socialist front groups, and that's who they're really serving, which is why our government continues to grow and grow and our freedoms and liberties get less and less. But I will end this right now today and come back and see the next chapter, why we should be against communism. Have a blessed day in Jesus' name. Amen.